Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Lily Mott. This podcast is co-produced by the National Lottery Community Fund and Be the Change Media Network. And it's all about youth social action, what it means, why it matters, and the incredible young people driving change in their communities. Youth social action is about young people finding their voice, standing up for what matters to them, and creating positive change. It's at the heart of the I Will movement, which is a UK-wide campaign that empowers young people to take social action and make a difference. And today, on October 22nd, 2025, the National Lottery Community Fund is launching the latest round of the I Will Fund to support projects that give even more young people the chance to lead change. To kick off our series, I am joined by two incredible guests, Molly Taylor and Henry Hughes. Molly is the co-founder of Youth Opportunities, co-chair of the I Will movement, and a youth voice advisor for the National Lottery Community Fund. She is a changemaker who believes in the power of belonging and turning lived experience into a force for good. Henry is a Deaflympian and fellow co-chair of the I Will movement. He is also a trustee at several organizations, including Stevenage FC Foundation, White Ribbon UK, and Board Racial Diversity UK, as well as a board member for 64 Million Artists. And I feel like neither of those intros do you guys justice, so I'm just going to put that out there. I think that you are both incredible people, and you're doing so much work to make the world a better place. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about some of the work that you will both have done and that you're going to be doing in your new roles. Molly, Henry, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here to kick off this podcast with me today. So let's get started by kind of setting the scene about both of your social action journeys. Let's start with Molly. Can you tell me a little bit about your involvement in the I Will movement? What has your journey been like with the movement? How did it all begin for you? And then, Henry, I'd love for you to jump in when Molly's told us her story. Go for it, Molly.
Hello, everyone. It's so lovely to be here, and what a privilege to have this space to talk about I Will, which holds such a big part in my heart, and that sort of rhymed. My journey officially started with I Will when I was 22, so in 2022. That was after I experienced a deep loneliness, something that I realise now I'd have fleeting experiences of growing up because of my lived experience, but this was chronic and it was long-lasting, everyday experience. And I realised that it couldn't just be me. And that's when I started to have conversations with other people around me. At the time, those were students at my university. And I realised that actually loneliness among young people was growing, and it wasn't just a me thing, which was ironic because even though I felt really lonely, I also then found belonging through hearing other people's stories. And at the time, previous government, the Conservative government, was leading on a loneliness strategy. And I believe that it still exists to this day. And at that point, I realised, oh, wow, it's not just, this small group of students experiencing this, but clearly it's a systemic issue that's happening in the UK. And so I kind of, as a lot of young people do, just got up and started to do something because I didn't want to sit back and let this feeling take over my life or other young people's lives. So coincidentally, I then came across the Belong Collective, which was convened by UK Youth, which is also part of the I Will movement and alongside Volunteering Matters. And they were running something called the Belong Collective, which was a youth advisory group on loneliness specifically. And it was all very coincidental that I came across this just by chance. And I joined that group, and that was sort of the initiation of me joining I Will a few months later. And in that group, we went to Parliament. I spoke at an APG on loneliness. I started to realise that my lived experience was actually a superpower, as opposed to being a deficit in my life, which I think a lot of young people experience growing up and, not wanting to talk about the marginalisation you face because you feel shame. But this was a space where I felt really heard and seen, and I Will was a continuation of that. And I'm so lucky now that I've been part of the movement for nearly 4 years. And every day that I'm involved, my lived experience becomes even more valuable to myself and to those around me. But I've also really enjoyed hearing from other young people and communities about their lived experiences. It's a big exchange and you get a huge sense of community. But in terms of generic social action, I used to think that I Will was the start of my journey. But I realise now, like a lot of other young people, we've been slowly chipping at sort of social action from a very young age and sort of tackling injustices that we face. And it doesn't have to be some fancy project. strict, but it can literally just be as simple as picking up litter because you don't want there to be litter on your streets, for example. And that's something that I used to do as a young child as well. So yeah, that's a bit about my involvement. But yeah, what a journey it's been. But yeah, I'd love to hear more about Henry's journey as well.
Yeah, wow. How do you follow that? My involvement in IVOR has not been as long as Molly. I've only been an IVOR ambassador since 2024. I'm a 2024 cohort. So I've only been an ambassador for 1 year before I became a co-chair. But to go back a bit further than that, I lived in Australia for 20 years. I don't sound like it because I was homeschooled. And, my youth social action kind of started when I was homeschooled because the reason why I was homeschooled is because teachers just didn't want to teach a deaf person, and society was always going to set up for me to fail. So it was my mum that made sure that I went on to do great things, and that made sure homeschooling was a very big part of it. I did many things during my homeschooling, whether it was speech and drama, poetry. I did swimming throughout my years, became a deaf Olympian and had my sporting career in that aspect. But I also, because I went through a lot of adversity, was just naturally put into advocacy because I believed back in Australia that deaf swimmers and deaf people were just marginalised to the fringes of society, and I wanted to change that. That's how I got involved into what was the Swimming New South Wales Youth Advisory Panel, which was my first entry into it. And I didn't realise that subsequently, when I got a few other roles in Australia, when I moved here, I didn't want to give up my advocacy. I wanted to continue with it. It made me who I am. So when I joined two youth advisory boards, and I absolutely loved them. But I really was so strongly interested in advocacy. I was always someone that loved to help other people find their advocacy and their agency, and I was looking for an organisation that could do that. So when the iWill recruitment came to process and I found out about iWill movement and about youth social action, I was like, oh my God, this is me. This is me written all over it. And signed up, became an ambassador, and then the 1 year that I've had, it's just been one of the most richest years of my life in terms of the opportunities I've got, the people that I've met, and some of them have become great friends, and one of them now my co-chair. So yeah, that to keep it short and snappy there, haven't been as long, but it has been as rich.
That is wonderful, and I feel so privileged that I got to see your friendship forming a little bit, and now I've kind of been along this journey with both of you cheerleading from the sidelines. So I'm so thrilled for both of you. And I think that you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to go a little bit deeper and understand more about what motivates you both as leaders in particular, and especially as you are stepping into this co-chair role. Both of you talked about personal challenges that you faced in your own lives. How have those experiences shaped the way that you lead today and your approach to leadership, especially as it comes to leading the I Will movement in this new role?
Yeah. So I kind of touched on this around the idea that when I joined I Will, I thought initially that that was my first stint at youth social action, but quite clearly it wasn't. And now I'm starting to redefine and sort of rewrite that narrative and understand where that really came from in my childhood. And I think like a lot of young people, it stems from somewhere out of a place of injustice. And that's exactly what happened for me. I mean, in my childhood, I had very traumatic experiences, and often decisions were quite literally made about me, without me, through family court, unfortunately. And that meant that I completely, didn't have any agency, participation, or power. And that quite often internalized into me that, I wasn't good enough and I wasn't worthy enough and I couldn't change things, which is so sad that I felt that way. But there was this one occasion when I was around 9 years old, and it was when the Syrian refugee crisis became quite topical at that time and was spread across the news and the media. And I remember switching on the TV and there being quite a lot of campaign and fundraising appeals for these children that were fleeing war. And I remember recognizing, like watching their stories and hearing their stories and recognizing the same sort of narrative within me. Even though I wasn't a refugee, I could understand the feeling of not feeling safe or not having any control over my life. And in that moment, I actually couldn't change my situation because it was dangerous for me to do so. Instead, what I did was I went out into community and I started to stand up for others in my school, in my local community, and started fundraising for the Syrian refugee crisis at large with Save the Children. And I think that was my first time that like felt really grounded in social action and could understand like, oh, I could actually change something tangibly. And I also had a bit of a leadership for the first time. Like I was the one that ran that campaign at my school with a teacher. And it was through that experience that it kind of taught me that leadership isn't about authority and, delegating tasks and telling people what to do. I've always tried to stay far away from being that type of leader, but it's definitely for me about being relational and like understanding people's stories, empathizing or sympathizing as much as possible, even if you haven't lived through their shoes or their experiences. Knowing that I don't hold, everyone's story, but that's the whole point, right? They're meant to tell it because it's their story to tell. And then I, as a leader, as co-chair, particularly now, can create a space where we can listen intentionally, where we have to unlearn and challenge our own biases and also challenge the views of others and learn alongside people and their lived experiences, and valuing young people and communities why, and understanding the crux of why they're doing things rather than what they're doing, because there's so much more. Like you can talk about your social action and that's really good, but I want to know as a human to human, like what started that journey and why you're doing it every day, because social action is hard and often it's not got many resource behind it, but you still do it. So that's kind of how my experience have shaped the way that I lead and hope to lead in the future in the co-chair role in particular.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, my personal challenges. It's interesting because I've always been not shielded away from society. I've always been a lone wolf in society, if I called myself that, because what I went through, being so unique, just being deaf in itself, it's such a very unique circumstances that it presented challenges that people just don't understand in my everyday life, looking at body language, lip reading people, people turning their back on me. And I feel really hurt when that happens, and people don't understand why I feel hurt that happens. And, when I'm in a room with people and people are, forming groups together and, I've been excluded from that, these are very visible emotional challenges that I face quite frankly every day. Even today, I still face it. And it meant that when it came to my leadership style, I've always been very comfortable in the uncomfortable, when people's uncomfortable. It means that I'm very comfortable making uncomfortable decisions. I'm very comfortable in holding someone's hand and guiding them through the process. I'm very comfortable of being let down many times because I know what's going to come next. I've seen this game happen again and again. So when it comes to, my leadership style, it means that, quite cool, calm and collective. But when something really doesn't happen, but I get really, really annoyed and angry because, Molly and I are both here to solve injustices. There's a lot of injustices out in the world, and Molly summed it up right. If you are doing a youth social action, you do feel that something's wrong in society. That's where youth social action stems from. You think there is an injustice that, I don't know, whether it's really local, that, your neighbour is not getting their parcels because they keep getting robbed, or even in a very national level, if you feel that social media has been really toxic in communities that are then tearing people apart. It requires a leadership and a duo, like Molly and I with the I Will movement, to bring people together, to bring that sense of community. Community is very, very powerful. And the best thing about communities, it exists in many different ways. We have the online community is something that has exploded since COVID. And I think that has done wonders to connect people from all corners of the country together to do social action. And when I see my fellow I Will ambassadors that I now lead, I see where I started and that they're on their start of their journey, and it does feel full circle, especially with this first year, the 2025 cohort, which is Molly and I's first year cohort to lead, I'm seeing a lot of them that are I was them when I was their age. I remember when I was their age, I was doing this, and I'm sounding quite old, aren't I? I'm only 21, but you know what I'm saying, and I know that through my experiences and the roles that have had over the year, that I can guide them through those processes. I can help them articulate their thoughts. I can help them give them the answer that they might have questions for, so that they can go and find another question that hasn't been answered, instead of trying to, you know, don't say waste time on a question that has been answered, but or just being more focused onto detail. So yeah, I know it's a very interesting one, and you know, we're always every day facing personal challenges, but it's how I convert that from challenges to lived experience to advocacy. So yeah, thank you.
That was the perfect segue into my next question, actually. As co-chairs of the I Will movement, you're definitely not just figureheads for this movement, and you both have, as you've been mentioning, been ambassadors, and you're moving through this process, kind of a full circle moment for both of you, which I think is incredible. You are leaders of this movement, and you're representing what it means to be youth-led, and that is something that we talk about a lot. But in practice, what does led by young people, and I'm putting that in quotes for people who are just listening, what does that phrase, led by young people, mean to both of you? Henry, let's start with you, and then Molly will come to you.
Yes, I mean, being led by young people is it's the current and it's the future. It was always the past as well. You know, being led by young people means, you know, co-design, co-leadership, working with young people to make the decision, having young people in the room when you're making decisions with young people, not patronizing young people and having us as a tick box. Because, you know, adults were young people once, and I think they can remember when they were young people how their adults constantly looked down on them, constantly didn't value them. And we're setting in a change in different generations of young people to come, where adults understand the importance of young people on board, in spaces, in the room that are made decisions. So yeah, I think I will leave it at that. Let Molly say something.
Wow, this is such a big question. And when I was asked this, I immediately had the thought of, I think this is one of my big life questions that I might not ever be able to know the answer to. And maybe our society won't ever be able to find a common definition or, you know, a one sentence line of what youth led or true participation looks like. But maybe that's a good thing, because I think that is the answer, right? Is that when something is youth led, it's down to the individual young person to decide and understand for themselves what that looks like in their context and what it feels like for them, not on behalf of anyone else. And I currently study a master's in children's rights. So my whole life is about young people and making sure that they're safe and that they have, you know, the voice and the capacity to lead. And a big question I've been thinking about recently is this idea around will young people ever have full agency or autonomy, which we're all championing over here. And I know that they're also doing that at the National Lottery Community Fund, the same as I will, and the same, everyone in the youth sector is trying to, you know, achieve this. But will they ever have that full agency if it ultimately depends on the resources of adults, right? Because in order for young people to have agency, they need to have resources and spaces and the capacity built around them, given to them by the older peers. And that is a really interesting question I always think about, and I'm trying to, you know, sort of decipher a lot more. But I think on that, what I can say for now, in my opinion, is that youth led means about, yeah, adults redistributing power and resources fairly, particularly to those that are often excluded from society or the most marginalised. Recognizing that young people are already leading their lives, and we must, you know, as adults, we need to notice it and nurture it, but not overwrite it and be like, well, you're doing something great, so I'm going to steal it away from you. Or maybe perhaps sort of showcasing it a way that is more from a from an adult power perspective. And by that, I mean, sometimes there are occasions of tokenism where we can see where young people are doing great things, but we think that we then need to go and parachute into them and help them. And then we go and showcase their work, but maybe it's not from a place of good intention. So I think we need to get more away from that. And I think true leadership in young people is about ownership. And by ownership, I mean that they understand the full feedback loop because they designed it themselves. So that's what I'd like to say on that. And it's a very big question that I hope to keep adding to and unlearning as well.
And just to add on to that, yes, just to add on to that, I always love the phrase that wisdom doesn't equate to age, it equates to experiences. And, I've heard from many adults that, a lot of young people go through it more experience in their lifetime than adults have done in their own lifetime. So wisdom comes from your experience, not your age. And I think the best leaders are often those who use their lived experience as leadership, not their ego as their age to lead. And I think that's why with young people, especially those who are in our space that do their own youth social action, there's a real rawness to their view of their world that stem from their inner wisdom that I always keep learning. I know Molly always keep learning, and even you, Lily. We go out there and we work with other young people and we hear their perspectives and we go, wow. Just when you think you've seen it all, someone always comes along to surprise you. And that's the beauty of working with young people. That's the beauty of working in youth sector, because you're always going to find something that I might not particularly, be interested in. I don't know, maybe numeracy skill is not something that I advocate for. But when I start listening to ambassadors talk about the importance of numeracy skills and how many young people are lacking behind in their numeracy skills, and these are the things that they're going to do to change it because of their lived experience, I'm like, I'm in, I'm sold. This is something I've learned that I want to advocate for. I always say it's a dream that I never thought I had. So, and that comes back to wisdom and leading by lived experience and leading by agency. So yeah, thank you.
I think that that was wonderful. And again, that leads me really well to this next question. But you touched on this a little bit. What role do adults and youth workers play in encouraging youth social action? And I'm going to kind of make this a two-parter, but what do you wish that more of those adults and more of those youth workers understood about working alongside with young people? I think you touched on a lot of this already, but what would you say to some of those adults and youth workers who might be listening to this podcast and working with young people? How can they encourage youth social action more?
Yeah, again, big question. Personally, in my view, I definitely see youth workers as anchors. They have this amazing ability, and haven't quite pinpointed what it is. Maybe it's that relational leadership that I've spoken about, of how they're able to position. And a lot of youth workers have their own lived experience, and that's why they go into the role, right? But they position themselves in really difficult spaces with some young people that haven't had trusted, safe adults in their life, and that is a really difficult situation to be in, and I've been there. And somehow they have this positionality to be able to unwire that within a young person and show them that the world and the community around them is safe, and that they don't have to live a life of fear and not feeling heard and not having space. And so I really do think that youth workers are some of the best people that we have in our society. And I think with adults, I think all of us have a place and something to play in terms of how we engage with young people and systems change and movements. But I think one thing I've been thinking about recently is that I do have this sort of opinion that adults, like general adults, particularly the ones that maybe see young people as different to them and create that sort of rhetoric around, young people are doing this, young people are doing that, they're not who we should be supporting in society, or maybe they're lazy, and that sort of generic rhetoric we've been hearing a lot recently. I think I've tried to zoom out a bit of that and understand what their experiences are and why they're projecting that view. And I've come to a conclusion recently, and again, this is my own opinion, it might not be factually correct, that I think a lot of adults have lost their connection to their inner child. And so they've forgotten about what it's like to play on the swings, what it's like to feel butterflies, what it's like to learn something for the first time. And as a result, they've kind of they're now removed themselves from their younger self, and they're not able to see themselves in the young people that exist today. And that's really sad, actually, for me. And I think that's why there's a bit of a disconnect. And maybe that's what is in youth workers that is perhaps different from everyday adults. But in terms of what I would say to adults or youth workers or anyone in general, what I wish they could do better, particularly for young people, is that young people don't want to be managed. You know, they don't need another decision maker standing over them. I think, like I said already, young people are already making very visible decisions about their own lives. And it's just the fact that we need to see it and then nurture it. And I think adults that do, great work with young people or support young people are ones that stand beside rather than above or in front of young people, who are willing to share power and, offer advice when it's necessary, when the young person wants it. And that's, again, coming back to their agency of young people being able to say, like, I need some help, rather than parachuting in and like offering help without a choice. And I also think that if we look at it in that way, then there's a lot less pressure on adults to then fix everything about young people. I don't think anything really needs potentially fixing in that way. I just think that we just need to listen a lot more and have the ability to step aside. And naturally, young people, as we are seeing, will create the solutions that they wish to see with those resources that we share with them. So that's what I would hope, that more adults are able to understand from this, and that's one thing I would say.
Yes, so I mean, youth workers and oh, just it's the cliche. They're the backbone. You know, they are really the backbone of young people's lives. And when I was a lot younger, I didn't understand why adults helped young people in that way. I didn't understand why they were interested in young people. And as I got older, I've really understood, the most incredible people I know in my life are all youth workers. All my former managers and youth leads and my current managers and youth leads today, they're just some of the most incredible people. They kept that inner child in themselves that Molly was talking about, hence why they're the best youth workers, ever. And I think from an adult perspective, you need to connect into your inner self because it helps with your own well-being and mental health. Because as you mature, in your later years, you really start to miss the things that you used to be able to do because you haven't been in touch with it in so many years, and then you start to lose your identity and you become disenfranchised because the younger generation of adults want to kind of move you on and you don't know what to do with your life and you become forgotten in society because you haven't been able to understand your full self. And because I hope I'm here in 50 years' time, still laughing and smiling and being the Henry that I am, because that's what made me survive my adversity. It was my inner self that Molly was talking about, and it's what I try and get out of many adults and many young people to keep reminding themselves that. And as Molly said, that young people don't want to be managed. And I say to youth workers out there, they just want to be trusted. Many young people don't feel like adults trust them to do the right thing. And of course they're going to make mistakes. It's what you call learning. And when you learn something, you learn a lesson from it and then you understand what to do next time. What we have too much rights and wrongs in this world and not enough. Oh, that just happened. Maybe next time I'll do it differently, or maybe next time I'll do it even better. So getting rid of this concept of right and wrong when it comes to young people and understanding their lived experience, where they've come from, it really makes you a lot better as an adult and a youth worker itself. And that's how, we can build that sense of community, build that trust and that relationship, that peer-to-peer support, that mentoring and buddying support we've spoken many times before going forward. So, yeah.
Oh, those were beautiful. I think that we could probably talk for hours about these topics, which I love. I think that these are conversations that need to be had much, much more. So I could listen to you guys forever. Can you both share a story of youth social action that has stuck with you? You both have met so many I Will ambassadors and you've gotten to travel around and see different projects. This can be maybe a small act that has had a big impact or a big project that you think has been making waves across the UK. Maybe it can be in your own work or a different I Will ambassador. What is a project that has really stuck with you and inspired you as you've been doing all of this work?
Yes, so no, I'm glad you asked this question because there was one big thing that jumped to my mind was the national youth strategy and the I Will ambassadors, the 10 of us, myself included, before I came co-chair, that got together as part of the consortium to support the Deliver You campaign and the National Youth Strategy. Since February, when we convened, I've never loved a group of people so much than I have with the National Youth Collaborative. We've had a lot of sessions together over the last, 10 months together, and talking about issues of young people right across England in this context, but more broadly in the UK, and the commitment to ensure that every stone was not left unturned, and that the commitment to make sure that the national youth strategy is felt in all corners of the areas that we all represented. That was one of the greatest privileges of my life and the greatest honor to be part of those people who've now gone on to do some incredible things since then. That is the power when you get people with their own youth social action to come together to work on a big strategy. That is what, as we go back before, youth leadership is, youth co-design is. It's trusting that young people know what young people do best, which is being young people. And then that is an example of adults and young people working together on a strategy that is going to benefit a lot of young people, a lot of children that are going to be young people in the future. And it's very, very important not to lose that context of how we are going to evolve it over the years. And, we're on the National Lottery Community Fund podcast, and there will be a huge part of the National Youth Strategy. And, a lot of the enrichment funds, we spoke about in our meeting with DCMF, really coming together and thinking about what's going to be the best for young people, because it came from our experiences, it came from our hearts, and it came from what we've seen in our communities, in our social actions, in our sectors, and our cross collaboration with everyone. So that's the real big highlight of my ambassador year so far, and I think it deserves a great mention for the work that the National Youth Collaborators and the I Will ambassadors involved in that were able to do. So yeah.
That's an incredible example. And I love how you've tied in the local to the national. I think that's really important. I mean, ultimately, both of those systems have to work together to create systems change. But my example is a lot more local, although it could definitely be used as a blueprint for national and other communities, which is what place-based work is within I Will. Currently, we work with Blackpool and Ipswich as towns and coastal towns of social action. And one example I have, which I've learnt about recently when I visited Blackpool about 6 weeks ago, was the Young Women's Social Action Group, which is supported by I Will and the United Youth Alliance, which is also partially funded by the National Lottery Community Fund, which is where Worlds Collide, which is amazing, in Blackpool. And this social action group is a youth-led group focused on young women who have consistently raised the issue of feeling unsafe, for example, on public transport. And so this year, and even just a few weeks ago, they launched a campaign called Our Safety is Our Right. And their actions, physical actions, literally quite included. They took some clean graffitis. They got permission to go and graffiti using stencils and eco-friendly cleaning products to then remove it afterwards. But it was the act of going out into their community very visibly and kind of showcasing that, yeah, their safety was their right. And they left bold messages across the town. And their main message was safety is not a privilege, but it is a right for every young person, particularly every young woman. So I just want to share one quote from an I Will ambassador called Ella, who is involved directly in this campaign. And they said to me that many young women in Blackpool have felt as if they don't have any kind of future. But in reality, there is so much hope and so much support for all of us. And I think that just goes to show that when young people are given the resource, to tap into the social action that they're really passionate about, to tackle the injustice that they've been impacted by, they're able to rise from it. And I think, that's why it's really stuck with me. And I think whilst this is obviously a very, local campaign, it's clearly a systemic wide issue among young women and girls. And I think this could be used as a blueprint for other towns and communities. So that's why it's really stuck with me.
I think that is wonderful. And I love that national aspect and the place-based. I think that, as you said, Molly, both so important. And I love that you highlighted those. My last question for both of you is honestly at the heart of both the I Will movement and the new I Will Fund, which launches today, when this is coming out, October 22nd. So when you both think about new projects being funded through the I Will Fund, what would success look like to you when it comes to youth social action and community? I'm going to challenge you to keep this in one specific point, because I know that we could, again, probably talk about this forever, but what would success look like to you with some of those new projects being funded? Let's go Molly first and then Henry.
Again, big question. I think really for me, and I think I've also seen this from a perspective of working with the National Lottery Community Fund as a youth voice advisor and having the privilege to, when organisations are going through the grant process, actually speak to the young people that are embedded in their organisation and seeing how it is youth led or how youth voice is embedded, which is such a privilege to do. So I think back to that point, I think that's what success looks like with this fund is, I know with sort of different funds of the National Lottery, Community Fund, they've got particular eligibility criteria, or you've got to go and, achieve something specific. But I think when we're looking at the context of young people and their communities, youth voice, power, and participation is so important. And I want to see that embedded at every level with organisations that are funded through it. And I think those things are really important because when organisations have those things down, young people start to feel heard and respected for the first time in their lives. And I've seen that time and time again through my work. And also it goes beyond them just being a youth participant. It means that they return and become leaders and mentors and their own decision makers, which obviously impacts their future lives and the livelihoods of more young people in the future. So that's what I think success looks like for me within the I Will Fund.
So yes, what success looks like for me is impact led by young people and it's influence led by young people. It's seeing, I'm a numbers person. I do love my numbers. I do love it when I see X number or a percentage number of an increase or a decrease of a certain project. And the success of the I Will Fund will be funding given to young people or youth-led organizations or organizations that support young people to drastically change the trajectory. I think that is real success. I think that's an example of how direct funding and just relief can give to the youth sector. I think that's what the I Will Fund is there. I mean, it's in the name, I will. I'm going to do this. I'm going to change the world. And that's what the fund is about. So more funding for organisations to ensure that youth-led projects are successful and however their criteria metric is. That's still important because that's what gets people eyes, it's numbers, it's where the direction is heading. So that's success for me and that's a brilliant metric to look at.
Before we close out, Molly, you wrote an incredible poem the last time that we were together, and you read it actually at a National Lottery Community Fund event. Can you please read that poem for us to close out this episode? I think it'll be a wonderful way to tie together this entire conversation, if you feel comfortable.
Yeah. So this poem comes from a question that I was asked. And the question was, how have I changed my community or a system around me? So maybe that is the title of the poem. But yeah, I will read it out now. Well, what if the very community that I grew up in played a part in traumatizing me, and I grew up to escape it, not belong? And as a result, I didn't realize my power until I was 21. I believe that to be able to change a system, to create change within a community, and by this I mean with a community and not on behalf of one, we need to feel belonging. And I want you to think for a second, what does belonging feel like to you? Do you feel belonging right now as you're listening to this? As social beings, our very makeup is built on the need for belonging. To feel belonging means to connect, to exchange, to be human, share a common thread. It also means to feel seen, to feel heard, and most importantly, belonging means feeling empowered. But what does empowered mean? I want us to focus on the power element. To me, when people feel empowered, it means for them to have power within themselves, power to do something, and power with others as a collective. And in this transaction, this exchange, in this empowerment, this self-realization is where a magical thing happens. We realize that we feel seen and heard, which then internalizes and opens us up to compassion, opens our hearts, and this allows us to receive and give back to our communities. That's how the I Will movement found me, what it gave me. It gave me belonging through the transaction of power, saying, I see you, I hear you, most importantly, I see your power. And this transaction, this toolkit, unlocked the innate power within me. It made me feel worthy enough, that my lived experience wasn't a burden, but a superpower. As someone who comes from child abuse and intersection of marginalisation and estrangement, my basic needs weren't met as a child. I was told, on purpose, that I didn't matter, that I was little and no one would listen to me, and therefore internalised that I had no power in my home, in my school, and in my community. But my very life was built politically. My rights were taken away and I didn't have a voice. Social workers and family court made decisions without me. But when I left those four walls and self-advocated for myself and spoke up about what happened, I realised that my life was political, and it wasn't just my life, but millions of children's lives, past and present. So I took roots and decided it would be my life's effort to create change. But it didn't start when I was 21, recognised by I Will. The fight for injustice started when I was 9 years old. It was just then, when I was 21, that I felt seen, to be held for my whole self, supported as Molly, not anyone else, through the lens of any other person. And that was liberating. So as this community and system held me, I became equipped with the tools to change the community and systems around me. To now, 4 years later, I'm becoming co-chair of I Will. I now reflect on my journey, and it's a privilege to be in this role, but even more of a privilege to be able to look inwards and challenge it, to change the community and system that helped me. And you might be thinking, why do I want to change it if it is so empowering? It's not that it isn't empowering, it's that change is a need. Not just within I Will, but change is inevitable, to reflect the changing community within it. Communities and systems are not stagnant. They are mechanisms, interactions of parts, constantly turning and shaping and jamming. I now, alongside my co-chair Henry, wish to bring more belonging even closely to the movement, so that belonging, which carries compassion and allows us as a collective to continue resisting together, be a healthy and sustainable one. I believe that we need to give power to more young people, my younger peers, young people that exist right now, that feel disempowered, feel like they don't belong, feel like they are forgotten about, feel like there's no hope. Because when young people receive opportunity, a good, meaningful, equitable one, it can quite literally change their life and give them the tools of unlocking that power within them. And for them to be able to then change systems and their communities around them. And that's exactly what happened to me.
Ugh, Chills. This is exactly what happened at the event that I had to follow after that, Henry, and now I get to do it again. So, Molly, Henry, thank you both so much for joining me today and for sharing your stories and your insights and your passion for youth social action. I think even if people are listening to this, you can feel it so much when you're talking, and I think that that is so beautiful. For anyone listening, don't forget the new I Will Fund from the National Lottery Community Fund launches today, October 22nd. This is a huge opportunity, so check out the link in the description of this episode for more information about the fund. Thank you for tuning in to this very first episode of this podcast. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join us in 2 weeks as we continue exploring youth social action, what it means, why it matters, and the incredible young people driving change in their communities. See you next time.